Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. Hope you're doing well. C-NOTE here. And this is the C-NOTE Audio Extravaganza. The show that is like a pizza shop. It's just everywhere. Anyway, I didn't have one prepared, so I just kind of winged it. Today I wanted to talk about really a follow-up to yesterday's afternoon podcast, which was about gaslighting. And it kind of presented this idea of C-PTSD, which stands for complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is something that is not officially recognized by the DSM. So it's kind of an interesting new frontier, sort of new, relatively speaking, in an unofficial capacity. But for me, it's interesting because I feel like it falls into a lot of stuff that I've been experiencing lately. So I kind of wanted to talk about it, define it, basically just read some more article stuff. Like, not really articles, it's like more like Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt. But just kind of talk about it and what it is and define it and share it with you guys because I think it's fascinating and something to look for because it's something that affects people in a way that is a lot more subtle than you would realize. It's something that happens in relationships with children, with parent situations, and it affects how parents can treat children and how people can treat future relationships. So I think it's kind of fascinating to break down, and if there's a way to distill it into simpler terms to be recognized as something that can be treated, like that would be fascinating. So without further ado, let's make this an official podcast and let's kick it off and do the thing.
Drums, please.
North, west, south, side, right, now here it is.
Okay, so C-PTSD, let's open this article that I had pulled up. Wikipedia ref. So C-PTSD, it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Also known as complex trauma disorder, is a psychological disorder thought to occur as a result of repetitive, prolonged trauma involving harm or abandonment by a caregiver or other interpersonal relationships with an uneven power dynamic. That's the big thing right there. C-PTSD is associated with sexual, emotional, or abusive, physical abuse or neglect in childhood, intimate partner violence, victim of kidnapping and hostage situations, indentured servants, victims of slavery, sweatshop workers, prisoners of war, victims of bullying, concentration camp survivors, and defectors of cults or cult-like organizations. So in a way, everybody? Situations involving captivity, entrapment, a situation lacking a viable escape route for the victim, or a perception of such, that's another important thing, a perception of such, can lead to C-PTSD-like symptoms, which include prolonged feelings of terror, worthlessness, helplessness, and deformation of one's identity and sense of self. Some researchers argue that C-PTSD is a distinct from, but similar to PTSD, somatization disorder, dissociative identity disorder, and borderline personality, with the main distinction being that it distorts a person's core identity, especially when prolonged trauma occurs during childhood development. It was first described in 1992 by Judith Herman in her book Trauma and Recovery, and an accompanying article. Though peer-reviewed journals have published papers on C-PTSD, the category is not yet adopted by either the American Psychiatric Association's diagnostic, the DSM-5, or in the World Health Organization International Statistic Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, 10th edition. However, it is proposed for the ICD-11 to be finalized in 2018. So there's a very strong chance that could be recognized very soon. What's fascinating to me is the perception of just kind of being withheld, like being the power dynamic. Somebody has some sense of power over you, whether it's emotionally or actually keeping you from social situations or anything like that. There's a lot of isolation that occurs in relationships, and even from parent-child things. And when it gets to an extreme, that could trigger those situations, and particularly when they get away from that, which is kind of what I'm dealing with. Having gotten away from a situation that was like that, I'm sort of dealing with this odd sense of freedom. Like, I don't know what to do with it, and don't necessarily fully allow myself to experience it in a way, which is kind of interesting also. I'm kind of like peeking out, which is also why at the same time I had to run all the way across the country. Like, I felt like if I was within the same state, that was still too close for me to have still felt like I was willing to give into that sense of control again. Because it's like that Stockholm Syndrome situation where you kind of get comfortable in that environment. Like why a lot of prisoners end up going back to jail, because there's a certain sense of comfort in it for them, or they get used to it. And I mean, there's bigger social issues with that too, but just kind of loose examples. So I'm going to read 2 other sections, and we'll dive into this a little deeper. If you've been dying to start that podcast about doves, or about your favorite jacket, or about a long-lost love, or a murder mystery about a cat who murdered everybody, you can start it now on Spotify for podcasters. I've been on Anchor for a long time, and now it is officially Spotify for podcasters, and it has been a platform that has been growing for forever. And I love it, and I still use it to this day, and it has hosted this podcast for 500 plus episodes now. So I highly recommend it. It is free to use. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. I'm literally on my bed recording on my, the phone is on the bed, and I'm just talking, and it's not that complicated. And then you can distribute your podcast on Spotify and everywhere else that podcasts are heard. So video podcasts are available too if you want to show your pretty face and have people see you. And you can do all that too. So just do it. It's totally free, no catch. Give it a try. Spotify for podcasters. Let's go. Okay, so this next section is about symptoms for children and adolescents. The diagnosis of PTSD was originally developed for adults who had suffered from a single event trauma, such as rape or a traumatic experience during a war. However, the situation for many children is quite different. Children suffer chronic trauma, such as maltreatment, family violence, and a disruption in attachment to their primary caregiver. In many cases, it is the child's caregiver who caused the trauma. The diagnosis of PTSD does not take into account how the developmental stages of children may affect their symptoms and how trauma can affect a child's development. The term developmental trauma disorder has been suggested, DTD. This developmental form of trauma places children at risk for developing psychiatric and medical disorders. Besson van der Kalk explains DTD as numerous encounters with interpersonal trauma such as physical assault, sexual assault, violence, or death. It can also be characterized by subjective events like betrayal, defeat, or shame. Subjective. That's an interesting way to look at it. Again, subjective and perception. Repeated traumatization during childhood leads to symptoms that suffer from those described for PTSD. Cook and others describe symptoms and behavioral characteristics in 7 domains: attachment, problems with the relationship boundaries, lack of trust, social isolation, difficulty perceiving and responding to others' emotional states, biology, sensory motor developmental dysfunction, sensory integration difficulties, somatization, and not sodomization, somatization, that's funny, and increased medical problems. Affect or emotional regulation, poor affect regulation, difficulty identifying and expressing emotions and internal states, and difficulty communicating needs, wants, and wishes, dissociation, amnesia, depersonalization, discrete states of consciousness with discrete memories, effect and functioning, and impaired memory for state-based events. behavioral control, problems with impulse control, aggression, pathological, self-soothing, and sleep problems. Cognition, difficulty regulating attention problems with a variety of executive functions, such as planning, judgment, initiation, use of materials, and self-monitoring. Difficulty processing new information, difficulty focusing, completing tasks, poor object constancy, problems with cause-effect thinking, and language developmental problems such as a gap between receptive and expressive communication abilities. Also self-concept, fragmented and disconnected autobiographical narrative, disturbed body image, low self-esteem, excessive shame, and negative internal working models of self. That's a lot of stuff. Let me see how much time I have, and I can read one more section. Okay, I got 2 minutes. This is for the adults. Adults with C-PTSD have sometimes experienced prolonged interpersonal traumatization as children as well as prolonged trauma as adults. This early injury interrupts the development of a robust sense of self and of others, because physical and emotional pain or neglect was often inflicted by attachment figures such as caregivers or other siblings. These individuals may develop a sense that they are fundamentally flawed and that others cannot be relied upon. This can become a pervasive way of relating to others in adult life, described as insecure attachment. The diagnosis of dissociative disorder and PTSD in the current DSM-5 do not include insecure attachment as a symptom. Individuals with complex PTSD also demonstrate lasting personality disturbances with a significant risk of re-victimization. 6 clusters of symptoms have been suggested for diagnosis of C-PTSD: alterations in regulation of affect and impulses, alterations of attention of consciousness, alterations in self-perception, alterations in relations with others, the one that's not sodomizing, somatization. I'll have to look up what that is. Alterations in systems of meaning. Experiences in these areas may include difficulties regulating emotions, including symptoms such as persistent dysphoria, chronic suicidal preoccupation, self-injury, explosive or extremely inhibited anger, may alternate or compulsive or extremely inhibited sexually, variations in consciousness, including forgetting traumatic events, reliving experiences, either in the form of intrusive PTSD symptoms or in ruminative preoccupation. Let me see how much time I have left. I'm pretty sure I'm out of it. Okay, I got 15 seconds. Changes in self-perception, varied changes in the perception of the perpetrator, alterations in relations with others, loss of or in changes one's systems of meaning, and disconnection from surroundings, accompanied by feelings of terror and confusion. So that's a lot. So I find that the most interesting thing is that it's the distinction between this and PTSD being that it's more about sense of self that's being deconstructed, not necessarily by one particular event, but a series of events. And those series of events may not necessarily be something that actually happened. It may be the perception of what happened, which is interesting because my ex-wife has expressed that in the past she felt like abandoned by her mother in some ways when, other people have expressed that that wasn't the case at all. But she feels so strongly that that was a thing that may have affected her behavior throughout the rest of her life. So that's kind of fascinating to break down. There's other information on the Wikipedia page for differential diagnosis, traumatic grief, things like that. So if you want to dive deeper into that, it's really fascinating and interesting. Some treatment stuff that I haven't read about yet, so I'll look into that. Get back to you, but I do have to cut this short because I'm picking up Molly from work to go to lunch. But some of the treatments for adults. You can establish safety, remembrance and mourning for what was lost, reconnecting with community and more broadly society. Herman believes recovery can only occur within a healing relationship and only if the survivor is empowered by that relationship. This healing relationship need not be romantic or sexual in a colloquial sense of relationship, however, and can include relationships with friends, coworkers, one's relatives or children, and the therapeutic relationship, which is basically what I'm going through right now. Complex trauma means complex reactions, and this leads to complex treatments. Hence, treatment for C-PTSD requires a multimodal approach, and it has been suggested that treatment for C-PTSD should differ from treatment for PTSD by focusing on problems that cause more functional impairments than this PTSD symptoms. The problems include emotional dysregulation, dissociation, and interpersonal problems. 6 suggested core components of trauma. Complex trauma treatment include safety, self-regulation, self-reflective information processing, traumatic experience integration, relational engagement, and positive effect enhancement. Multiple treatments have been suggested for CTPSD. Among these treatments are experiential and emotionally focused therapy, internal family systems therapy, sensory motor psychotherapy, eye movements, desensitization and reprocessing therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, psychodynamic therapy, family systems therapy, and group therapy. But essentially, it sounds like some of the treatments are kind of what I'm doing, like getting close to your support system again, reestablishing what that is, getting yourself back into a routine of what you want in life, standing your ground, and distancing yourself from that traumatic event, but also kind of mourning and acknowledging it. So for me, it's like mourning the loss of my wife and that divorce and the child situation, and working through all of that and acknowledging it and not pretending it's something that didn't happen. So I think all of that stuff's really important. And this is really fascinating and really interesting. So stuff that I was reading, and that last one I read on my own. So I wanted that I just read for the first time. So I wanted to share it with you guys. I thought it was worth talking about. If you have any questions, I'd love to discuss it. And or if you have any thoughts or any experience, it would be interesting to find out. So anyway, this has been the C-Note Audio Extravaganza talking about C-PTSD. If you have any questions or if you want to talk about it, hit me up Rival My Design on all the social channels or on here on Anchor, and just send me a call in and let's chat. I'll talk to you guys later. Hey everybody, I want to thank you guys for listening to the C-Note Audio Extravaganza. If you would like to go to HiMyNameIsChristian.com, you can sign up for my newsletter where you'll get the written version of the podcast, and follow me on Rival My Design on all the social channels and all that good stuff. We can chat and have ourselves a jolly good time wherever it is that I am. So I really appreciate it. And thank you guys. I hope you have a good one.